It had been 147 days since Irene last spoke to her son. She knew because she counted. Not obsessively, not bitterly, but like someone who still hoped. Like someone who still circled birthdays on a calendar, even when no one else remembered hers. That Thursday, the sky outside her kitchen window was the color of wet concrete. She was halfway through peeling an apple when her phone buzzed on the table. At first, she ignored it. Scams, telemarketers, wrong numbers. That's what it usually was these days. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw the name Greg. She froze. Her son, her only child. Irene stared at the screen, the peeler still in her hand, juice dripping from her fingers. Should she answer? Would it be another rushed check-in before he hung up in a hurry? Or worse, would it be one of those guilt-laced favors masked as small talk? But something in her heart leaned forward, so she picked up. Hello? A beat of silence, then his voice bright and chipper. Hey, Mom, it's me. You doing anything for Thanksgiving? She blinked. That was the opener. No. How are you? No. I've been thinking about you. Just a casual, offhanded tone like calling a dentist to check availability. Still, something softened in her. It always did with Greg. Well, she said slowly, I figured I'd stay home. Roast a little chicken, maybe bake something if my hands aren't too stiff. Watch that old Cary Grant movie I love. Greg laughed on the other end. That laugh she remembered from when he was 9, playing outside with dirty knees and scraped elbows. The kids were talking about you, he said. Elliot even asked if Grandma would be there this year. Thought maybe you'd want to fly out, be with us. You know, it just wouldn't feel right without you. That sentence landed differently. It didn't float like fluff. It stuck. It wouldn't feel right without you. 5 years. That's how long it had been since Greg said anything that resembled wanting her, not needing help, not needing money, but simply wanting her presence. Irene stood still, blinking at the wall. Something swelled in her chest, a strange combination of joy and disbelief, like warmth blooming in a room she forgot had windows. I'd love that, she whispered. No hesitation, no conditions, just a soft yes. He didn't offer to help book the flight. He didn't ask if it would be too hard on her back or if she needed a place to stay. But Irene didn't care. She didn't mention her arthritis, or the fact that she'd already decided to skip Thanksgiving to save money this year. She just nodded alone in her kitchen and replied, I'll figure it out. Because sometimes the hope of being wanted is louder than practicality. And Irene, well, she was still someone's mother. That evening, Irene sat at the kitchen table long after the dishes had been washed and the lights turned low. The phone calls still echoed in her ears. It wouldn't feel right without you. She didn't want to jinx it, but she also couldn't stop the smile that kept sneaking back onto her face. There, in the quiet warmth of her tiny kitchen, something stirred, something old and soft and almost forgotten hope. She reached for the envelope she had tucked away last Christmas, emergency cash. It had taken nearly a year to fill a 10 here, a 20 there, carefully stacked in the back of the flour jar. Irene laid the bills out on the table like puzzle pieces. She didn't count it twice. She didn't hesitate. This was worth it. That night, she booked her ticket, a non-stop flight to Minneapolis, Thanksgiving morning. She even paid extra for more legroom, $12 more, because for once, she wanted to feel like she mattered too. The next day, she took out her shopping list. Not for groceries, not this time. She bought 2 books for the grandkids, one about outer space for Elliot and a mystery novel for Ruby. She added a box of dark chocolate truffles. Malene used to like those. Irene remembered, even if Malene never asked. She also bought something she hadn't bought in years, a new cardigan, navy blue, soft wool, the kind that hugs you just enough to remind you that you belong somewhere. Later that night, Irene stood in front of the mirror and tried it on. It fit just right. She looked at herself, older, yes, lines near the eyes, silver streaks in her hair, but her reflection didn't look sad. Not tonight. She saw a woman who was wanted, a woman on her way. And for the first time in a long time, she packed not out of obligation, but out of joy. Irene stood at Gate 3A of Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. Her wheeled suitcase sat quietly beside her, her coat folded neatly over one arm. Her cardigan hugged her tightly against the sterile chill of the terminal air. She had landed 42 minutes ago. She checked, twice. Outside the security barrier, people flooded through the arrival gates in waves of joy. There were balloons. There were signs. There were reunions so loud and warm they brought tears to strangers' eyes. One little girl screamed, "Grandma!" before launching into her grandmother's arms. Irene smiled at the scene, then let the smile fade. She kept standing. People came and went, hugging, crying, laughing, claimed. And she stood like a forgotten package marked fragile, left behind by mistake. Her phone buzzed once. Not a call, not a message, just a social media notification. She hesitated, then opened it. Her fingers trembled. It wasn't from Greg, but it was of him. There they were, Greg Meline, Elliot Ruby, all of them gathered around a glowing dinner table. Turkey, potatoes, cranberry sauce, laughter, candles, and wine glasses mid-toast. The caption read, "Full house, full hearts, happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." Irene stared at the photo. Once, twice, 3 times. No mistake. There was no seat for her. She wasn't late. She wasn't early. She was excluded. Not a glitch. Not a mix-up. A decision. The photo didn't just sting. It detonated something. In a single frame, Irene saw everything she'd refused to believe. Greg laughing, wearing the navy sweater she had mailed him last Christmas. Melon glowing, glass of wine in hand. Elliot and Ruby leaning over mashed potatoes and a pie that wasn't hers. They were all there. They were all smiling. And they were all complete. Without her. She zoomed in, looked again. No extra place setting. No high chair pulled out of storage. No hint that anyone had been expected at all. Irene stared at the image like it was an X-ray of her own heart cracked clean through. They didn't forget. They planned it without her. She felt her throat tighten, but no tears came. Not yet. Instead, she did something unexpected. She folded her coat over her arm. She stood up straighter, and she walked. Out of the terminal, past the taxi line, past the shuttle signs. Past the place where someone should have been waiting with a hug and a, "There you are," but no one was. And suddenly, Irene wasn't waiting anymore. She was done. Irene didn't cry. She didn't collapse onto the cold airport bench. She didn't call Greg and demand an explanation. She didn't scream or whisper or beg. She simply walked. Not because it didn't hurt, but because the wound was too deep for noise. Her suitcase rolled behind her with a soft plastic rattle. The late November wind curled through the automatic doors as she exited the terminal, sharp, gray, indifferent. She passed a line of taxis. She passed the shuttle stand. She passed a young couple holding hands and laughing, their joy slicing the air like confetti. She walked a half-mile before she saw it. Tina's Diner. A squat building with a flickering neon sign and fogged-up windows. Paper turkeys taped to the glass. A warmth that seeped out through the cracks in the door. She pushed it open. A bell jingled overhead. The inside smelled of hot grease and cinnamon. The waitress behind the counter looked up and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, hun." Irene nodded, her voice steady. "Same to you." And she chose a booth by the window, not the corner, not the shadows, right by the window. Because sometimes you don't hide your hurt. You set it down where the world can see and keep walking anyway. The waitress returned with a plate, 1 slice of pumpkin pie. Warm. Flaky, with a scoop of whipped cream that leaned slightly to the left like it had been placed in a hurry. Irene stared at it, not because it looked perfect, it didn't, but because it wasn't made for anyone else. She didn't bake it for a gathering, didn't cut it carefully into equal pieces, didn't serve it with napkins folded like little fans. It was hers. She picked up the fork. Her hands were still a little shaky, but steady enough. The first bite, cinnamon, clove, a little too much nutmeg, but it melted on her tongue like something sacred. She hadn't had pie like this in years, not because there wasn't pie, but because she had always made it for others. Birthdays, holidays, church fundraisers, family dinners. She was always the one serving. Now she was simply being. She ate slowly. She didn't scroll her phone, didn't check for texts, didn't wait for anyone to show up and say, "Sorry, we forgot." She ate like someone who had finally remembered herself. And in that diner, fogged windows, squeaky booths, cheap cutlery, Irene felt something return. Not family, not forgiveness, but herself. The motel was beige, square, forgettable. A sign outside blinked, "Weekly rates, vacancy." Irene didn't hesitate. She didn't check reviews or ask for recommendations. She just walked in, suitcase dragging behind her like a tired truth. The man at the front desk barely looked up. Room 114. End of the row. She took the key, thanked him, and made her way down a cracked sidewalk. Inside the room smelled like old detergent and cable TV reruns. But it had a heater. It had hot water. And right now, it had space. Space to think, space to be, space to breathe without the weight of being someone's mother, someone's afterthought. She sat on the edge of the bed, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the beige wall for a long, long time. Then she reached for her notebook. Not the grocery list one, the other one. The one she kept hidden at the back of her suitcase. The one she wrote in when words felt safer on paper than in her mouth. She opened to a blank page and wrote slowly, clearly, deliberately, "I am not a side dish at someone's table." She underlined it, then underlined it again, because for decades she had served, poured, supported, and all the while she had been placed to the side, next to the mashed potatoes, never at the center. But now she was writing her own place card, and this time the table would look different. The morning air was sharp. Frost clung to the railings outside the Valley First Credit Union. Irene's boots made slow, certain steps up the frozen concrete stairs. She was wearing her navy cardigan, the one she bought to feel seen. Today, it wasn't for anyone else. It was armor. The teller at the front counter looked up, young and polite. "Good morning." "How can I help you today?" Irene smiled, but her tone was firm. "I'd like to speak to someone about all of my accounts." Within minutes, she was ushered into a small office. Glass walls, fake plant in the corner, a faint hum from the overhead lights. A woman named Natalie introduced herself as the account manager. She wore pearl earrings and spoke with the gentle, professional calm of someone used to soft chaos. "What can I do for you today, Mrs. Wexler?" Irene sat down slowly. "I want to cancel all automatic transfers to my son. I want to stop every payment that isn't serving me anymore. And I want to set up a trust for my granddaughter, Emma." There was a beat of silence. Natalie blinked, then nodded, and began typing. One by one, the lines of connection that had silently drained Irene for decades were erased with the tap of a key. Tuition payments, insurance, random cash gifts, gone. "Would you like to revoke power of attorney as well?" Natalie asked gently. Irene looked up, eyes clear. "Yes, revoke it." Natalie slid a form across the table. Irene signed with hands that didn't shake this time. When it was done, she stood up. And in that moment, Irene Wexler was no longer someone's safety net. She was her own foundation. The envelope had been in Emma's mailbox for 2 days. She almost missed it, a plain white letter tucked between junk mail and a dental appointment reminder. No stickers, no glittery ink, just her name, her real name, in handwriting she hadn't seen in far too long. Emma Wexler, 12 Pond Hollow Lane, Worcester, MA. She opened it slowly, carefully, like she already knew it wasn't just a letter. Inside was a single page, folded once, unlined paper. The handwriting familiar, still elegant, still Irene. She read the first line, Emma, dear, you once told me I was your safe place. Emma sat down at the kitchen counter. She kept reading. By the third paragraph, her hands were shaking. By the last line, her breath had caught in her chest. No bitterness, no anger, just honesty, grace, and a kind of quiet grief that wrapped itself around her like a shawl. She didn't wait. She called immediately. The phone rang 3 times before Irene picked up. "Grandma?" A beat of silence. Then Irene, soft and surprised, "Emma, I got your letter." Emma's voice trembled. I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," Irene replied gently. "This wasn't yours to carry." "But I want to carry it now," Emma said. "All of it. You shouldn't be alone, not like that." And in that moment, through a cracked speaker and a trembling voice, Irene wasn't alone anymore. The train hissed as it pulled into the station. Cold air swirled through the platform, and Irene stood there, scarf wrapped tight, hands folded over a small thermos of tea she didn't drink. She hadn't been hugged in months. Not a real hug, not one that meant, "I missed you, I see you, I need you." She almost didn't recognize the girl running toward her, not because Emma had changed, but because no one had run toward Irene in years. "Grandma!" The voice cracked through the December wind, and then arms, warmth. Sobs muffled into a wool coat. Emma buried her face in Irene's shoulder like she was 6 again. And Irene, strong, silent Irene, trembled. Not from the cold, but because her heart, sealed shut for months, had just been kicked wide open. No apology was spoken, no anger, no rehashing of what was lost. Just this, a granddaughter who showed up, a grandmother who finally let herself collapse into love. Right there on platform 7B. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and tea was poured, Emma looked around the motel room and smiled. Tidy, warm. There were books stacked by the lamp and a tiny folding table in the corner. She walked over, noticed the chessboard set up. Half played, white queen missing, black knight at the center. "Grandma," Emma asked, "you still play chess?" Irene didn't even glance up. She moved a pawn forward, calm and steady. "I never stopped." And Emma smiled not just at the answer, but at what it meant. That her grandmother, for all she'd lost, was still thinking 2 moves ahead. It started small. A missed call, then 2, then a text from Greg that just read, "Hey Mom, just checking in, everything okay?" No reply. 3 hours later, Malin sent her own version, polite, short, vaguely controlling. "Hi Irene, hope you're well. Just a reminder that the property tax bill is coming up. Should we schedule a transfer?" Still silence. They waited. Nothing. No, "Sure, honey." No, "Of course, dear." No instant reply like always. At 10:13 p.m., Greg finally said it. Why isn't she answering? Meline, standing barefoot in the kitchen, scrolling through Irene's old messages, muttered, "Because something's wrong. She always answers. Always." Greg started pacing. The longer the silence stretched, the louder it felt. Suddenly, the entire house, once filled with confidence, felt like it was built on borrowed money and borrowed patience. He picked up his phone again, checked the joint accounts, and froze. Access denied. He tried again. Same result. Meline leaned over his shoulder. "What the hell does that mean?" Greg's voice cracked. "It means she shut us out." For the first time in years, they weren't in control, and it terrified them. Meline didn't knock like a guest. She pounded the door 3 sharp fists, like she still believed she had the right to demand an audience. Irene opened it slowly. No fear, no forced smile. Just a calm, steady presence in a beige cardigan. Meline stepped in without waiting to be asked. "We're worried," she said. Irene didn't blink. "Are you? You disappeared. Greg says you're not answering. The kids. We were all just caught off guard." Irene motioned toward the couch. Meline sat legs crossed, tight rehearsed apology ready on her tongue. "Look, maybe Thanksgiving was Chaotic, misunderstood. But we love you. The kids love you. Silence. Can't we just move forward? Irene's voice was soft, but the words were sharp enough to cut marble. I'm not angry, Malene. I'm just done. Malene stared, thrown off script. What do you mean, done? Irene sat across from her, hands folded. I gave, and gave, until you thought it was yours by birthright. She leaned forward, voice like stone. This silence you fear, it's called peace. Malene blinked, fidgeted. But what about the kids? The ones who left me standing at gate 3A? That landed. I'm not the woman who sends checks to feel included anymore. Then what are you? A pause. Then Irene smiled. I'm the woman who finally remembered she matters. And just like that, Malene realized the door hadn't just closed, it had locked. Malene was still talking, still spinning her lines, still begging in polished tones that didn't match the truth. But Irene, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't list the things they'd done wrong. She didn't cry. She just looked her in the eye and said, I'm not angry. I'm just done. 14 words, no drama, no noise, but they hit Malene like a wrecking ball because anger she could work with. Anger meant Irene still cared. Anger was familiar. It had a rhythm. But being done, it meant Irene had moved on. With no announcements, no fireworks, just quietly. It meant Malene no longer had access. Not to the money, not to the forgiveness, not to the woman she thought would always say yes. That sentence ended the conversation. And the era. The lawyer looked up from the papers. Are you certain, Miss Wexler? Irene didn't hesitate. Yes. You understand this revokes all previous beneficiaries. Irene nodded. Good. There was no bitterness in her voice, just clarity and peace. She signed the new will in blue ink. Every asset, every savings bond, the apartment, the retirement fund, the life insurance, all of it now went to Emma. Not because Emma asked, but because Emma showed up. Because Emma listened, because Emma held her grandmother like someone who mattered. Irene didn't need revenge. She didn't need anyone to suffer. She just needed her legacy to land in the hands of someone who would never use it as a leash. And when the lawyer asked her one last time, "Would you like to leave a message for the others?" Irene smiled gently. They already received it. They just didn't read it. The phone rang at 6:42 p.m. Irene didn't rush to pick it up. She let it ring. Not to be cruel, but because she no longer lived on call. She answered on the 5th ring. Hello? Greg's voice cracked through the line. Mom, I'm sorry. What happened? I didn't think. Irene didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She waited. And then, with a calm that made his voice shake harder, she said, No, Greg, I was your family. You haven't been mine in a long time. There was silence, the kind of silence that says more than any apology ever could. Greg didn't know what to say. For once, there was nothing he could offer. No transfer. No visit. No explanation. The call ended not with a bang, but with a breath. And Irene, she stood up, poured 2 cups of tea. Emma, she called softly, your move. The room was quiet. Not empty, just quiet. Irene sat at a small wooden table, a soft cardigan draped over her shoulders. 2 candles flickered, a warm plate of roasted vegetables, and a single slice of pumpkin pie. No phone in hand, no one waiting to call, no audience, just her, still present. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, I'm still here. Not broken, not erased, still here. And finally, enough. Fade to black. Sometimes the loudest strength is silence. Not the silence of giving up, but the silence of choosing yourself after years of being everyone else's yes. Irene's story reminds us you are not selfish for walking away from those who only remember you when it's convenient. You are not cruel for closing the door to people who only knock when they want something. You are allowed to be your own home, to light your own candles, to say, I'm still here, and know that's enough. So maybe today is the day you stop waiting to be invited and start sitting at the table of your own making. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your worth, your silence, your strength, leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that speak to the soul and remind you you are not alone.